The Nothing Phone 3 has one of the most standout designs you'll ever see, and it's backed by three 50 megapixel main sensors, a funky cool dot matrix LED design, and all-day battery. But this particular phone is the most controversial flagship of 2025. On the front, you get a 6.67-inch OLED panel, 120 Hz. Couple of controversial aspects though. This is actually an LTPS panel, not an LTPO, which means it's less power efficient. It doesn't drop down to a single hertz when you're using it, which does impact battery life, although that is still pretty good. And then the display itself, it's rich and vibrant in terms of its colors and is really good job in terms of blacks, and you get really good contrast as well. So watching content down here is really, really great. And a couple of other key things to mention here: 4500 nits of peak brightness. So when you're using this outdoors or indoors, you're gonna get super rich and detailed colors, and it doesn't wash it out even at the top end of that peak brightness. 88.5% screen to body ratio and 460 pixels per inch, and it is backed up by 960 Hz of PWM dimming. So the display on the Phone 3 is flagship level. It does have some nice cues though, for example, like this matrix dot LED in the corner, which you can customize via the settings. You can adjust this to time, play games, etc. And in the community, they are developing this more to add more functionality to it. So that aspect is very, very cool. But the classic Glyph design is actually gone, such as found in the Nothing Phone 3A Pro. That had it and it looked really, really good. And then that asymmetrical camera design on the rear houses three 50 megapixel cameras, which we'll break down for you very, very quickly. You get a 50 megapixel wide at 24 millimeters, a 50 megapixel telephoto periscope, and then another 50 megapixel ultra wide. And then let's break those down in terms of performance and how they actually look and operate and how the output is. So the main lens bends down to 12.5 megapixels and captures photos really well in good lighting conditions. Colors do have a nice natural look to them as well. No over processing here, so it retains much of that natural look. And it's kind of the new standard now in the industry to not have an overly saturated, contrasty image, but a more natural one. In low light, still in the wide, it's very good, actually very, very impressive, and actually does a really good job of dealing with noise. And again, colors look really, really good, even in darker areas, and doesn't overly brighten them. Moving across the telephoto, this is a 3x telephoto. And again, the output is very, very good for what's on offer. Good dynamic range of colors, well-balanced detail, no issues at all. Until you go further up the zoom lens, you then lose out on that extra bit of quality. And then ultra wide, no autofocus here. A bit of a hit and miss on paper. It looks great, the output is fine, and then colors look nice and natural. Sometimes it can have a weird tint to it, which is a bit of a shame. And again, in ultra wide, it produces very, very similar results. Some a bit of softness, but overall good dynamic range, details, and colors. When it comes to social media aspect, if you're capturing images from the phone on here and then uploading them, you're going to get really good quality. If you're capturing it via the Instagram app, as an example, you do lose some detail. It's a more flatter, more compressed, cropped image as well. Moving on to video, you get 4K 60 here from the main lens. Looks really, really good. Excellent quality, good dynamic range, colors, really well balanced. Not far off, I would say, a Samsung S series phone in terms of video output. Very, very close. Looks really, really good. Overall, the camera system on the telephoto wide and video on the Nothing Phone 3 are very, very impressive. Using the Phone 3 on the daily, performance-wise in terms of its OS, is an absolute treasure. There is almost no bloatware on here that you're not going to want to keep. It does have some pre-installed Google apps, but the majority you're going to want to keep. It's fast, it's smooth, transitions are excellent, no judders or slowdowns, and at times when you're using this phone, you forget that this isn't a 12, 13, 1400 pound bleeding edge flagship device. It runs just that smooth. Nothing labeled this as their first true flagship. Now, in terms of the OS and the cameras, that's 100% correct. When you go across the stuff that lives within this body, it's powered by Snapdragon 8S Gen 4. And then when you compare it to an actual flagship like an 8 Elite, then you're seeing some significant performance differences. The 8 Elite does give you an overall 32% better performance on Antutu's benchmarks. And then when you go across to Geekbench, the Elite does again give you 46% better performance on single core and 41% better on multi-core. The 8S Gen 4 is a flagship chipset, but against last year's flagship, the 8 Gen 3. But when you're using it to play games, things like Call of Duty, for example, you're going to get really good quality output. Any high performance game, high performance graphic games, you won't top these out in the max settings, but you will get pretty close, and it looks and runs very, very well. Graphics are super crisp, FPS is very stable, no drop frame rates. On some of the games you're playing, we were getting over 100 frames per second. And then let's just let you play a bit more of this gaming experience and also enjoy the sound output from the Nothing Phone 3. And then charging performance, it's a 5,150 milliamp hour battery with charging at 65 watts, no plug-in box, sadly, so that has additional cost. Pretty rapid, it actually smashes anything that Samsung has on offer at the moment as an example, even Apple and Google in fact. I think only next year will Samsung actually be able to cope with that kind of charging speed, which gives an indication of some of the flagship features on the Nothing Phone 3. The golden question, is this Nothing Phone 3 a true flagship? No. Let me explain. Essentially, there's elements of this phone that are flagship level. Things like its OS, absolutely stellar. Runs very, very quickly, super fast, amazing transitions, simple, clean, and you get a really, really good experience with tons of ongoing support, like the beta that's just released for 4.0. So it gives an idea that Nothing is going to invest a lot of time in this, including the Nothing Playground, to make this a really prominent OS when it comes to Android devices, and it runs very, very well. The charging performance is amazing. The CPU performance is also very, very good. And then the cameras are again very good. But what makes this not a flagship is the fact that the design style does stand out versus others, but it doesn't exactly scream flagship. It's sort of a mishmash design, and I understand there's some design language and concept as to why it looks like this, but it's not very appealing. And then the biggest couple of issues is the panel is an LTPS, not an LTPO panel for the reasons that we already mentioned. The chipset is an 8S Gen 4, not a flagship 8 Elite. And then that gives us to the biggest controversial aspect, and that's the price. $799 for a phone that, and a brand that has sort of built itself on lower cost devices and higher quality displays and phones, etc. Nothing very, very similar represented to OnePlus, the never settled flagship killer analogy, and that has unfortunately gone. But the other point in this is, why would you buy this particular phone for $799 when you can gain a lot of the elements here in a Nothing Phone 3A, which will give you dual 50 megapixel cameras, rapid charging, and the same OS experience for half the cost, around $349. So the Nothing Phone 3 enters a very competitive space, but can it compete against things like the iPhone 17, S25 series, Pixel 10? Not quite, but it's a good, great phone, but the $799, probably not. But let us know in the comment section your thoughts on this Nothing Phone 3. Is this a true flagship, or would you go for one of the other three that we've just mentioned? Let us know in the comment section, and be sure to like and subscribe. Until next one, we out.